here in 2017, I guess, November, making us some interviews. He is a professor he's a professor of business history at the P.1 Norwegian Business School in Oslo. More specifically, he is a member of the Department of Strategy and Entrepreneurship. Later on, we'll give more information on him, but he's a really very well-known international scholar in the very specific topic of Americanization of management education and going beyond that. The first presenters at 8:45 is Martín Monsalve. Martín is at the Universidad del Pacífico in Lima, Peru. The other one is Andrea Luc. Martín?
There he is. Yeah.
Andrea Luc, who is a member of our group, but also he's from Argentina, and she is a member of the Argentinian Council Research or something like that. The equivalent in Colombian Conciencias. The difference is that in Argentina is serious and it works out. In Colombia, it's a joke. Okay. The next speaker is Adoración.
She's not here yet.
She's not here yet, but she is from Madrid at the CUNEF, and at the time we will present her. Then comes Rory Miller.
He's there.
He is in Liverpool. Hi, Rory. And he knows very much and very well Latin American business history and economic history. We're very pleased to have you here, Rory. Then at 11:15, Gabriela Recio. Gabriela Recio, who is at the time an independent researcher in Mexico City. After that, the keynote lecture by Rol, and in the afternoon, Davila, myself, will make a presentation on the history of management in Colombia. And finally, at 3 p.m., Sergio from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, la Uniagrario Alfa.
Hola, Sergio.
De Rio.
Hi.
Okay. So that I guess this is, I don't know if you want to, something is missing.
I don't think so.
Well, maybe I forgot to say something very critical in terms of the operation of the whole thing and the content also. The morning sessions are going to be coordinated by our Gabriel Galan, who is he has a doctoral degree in history, Oxford. He's a new member for our group. He's going to teach to explain you how in Colombia 15 minutes is 15 minutes, not 16 or 17. And in the afternoon, the coordinator will be a Colombian one, member of our group, Beatriz Rodriguez, who at present time is teaching at Universidad del Pacífico in Lima. So that's it, basically. So I want to repeat that you are all very welcome, both the ones who are virtual people. No, they are real, but they are all of you are very real. That you are communicating via Zoom, and some of the other people are here present. If you agree, we are in advance, 9 minutes in advance. Now we can start. I'll give the floor to Gabriel for him to explain some of the rules of the game.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Carlos, for your introduction to, I think, what's going to be a wonderful day, a wonderful event.
Just one comment. We will switch between English and Spanish. So feel free to speak in Spanish if you feel more comfortable. If not, we will speak in English because Rolf and other people are, better for you to understand our discussion. But it's absolutely allowed to speak in Spanish if you prefer.
Okay.
And you can make question and translate it.
Or Portuguese.
Or Portuguese, of course. Of course, Sergio. So, sorry for the interruption.
No, don't worry. So it's my great pleasure to be chairing the first panel of the morning. And so I'm going to introduce the speakers. The first one is Martin Monsalve, who the last time I saw you was in Oxford. You were very religiously in a concert, and now I see you very religiously here connected. So it's very nice. So Martín is going to be talking about la construcción de un sistema gerencial, la formación de la educación gerencial en el Perú de 1960 a 1980. Martín Monsalve is an associate professor at the Universidad del Pacífico and former president of Universidad del Pacífico Press and editor of Apuntes, Revista de Ciencias Sociales. He holds a PhD in history from Stony Brook University, and his current research interests are corporate networks of large Peruvian companies, the role of family business in regional development, and the impact of technology in the history of Peruvian business. His most recent publications include, for example, History of Retailing in Latin America, from the corner store to the supermarket, in John Stover and Vicky Howard's book, The Routledge Companion to the History of Retailing, and Regional Elites in Peru in a Context of Fiscal Boom, Arequipa, Cusco, Piura, San Martin, from 2000 to 2013. So Martin, the floor is yours. It's a very democratic room, but if I have to exercise my dictatorial powers to keep our session on track in terms of time, I will do it. But please go ahead.
Silence. It's in silence.
We cannot hear you, Martin.
Okay, now you can hear me, I guess.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I will share my presentation, and then tell me, please, if you see you can see the slides. Yes. Okay. Okay, I changed the title because this was a suggestion of Carlos. He told me, search for a title where the people who live in the period use these words. So I changed for In Search of Development, Management and Technical Education in Peru, 1960 to 1970. Okay, so that's what I did, because one of the things that we'll see in this discussion about management and technical education in Peru is the idea of development, how they want to create a development. They say the problem with Peru is not that they don't have natural resources. The problem with Peru is that we don't have human capital. No, so that will be the idea. So let me see. So what we want to explore in this presentation, management and technical education as let me see. Sorry. Okay, if I can do something with this. Yeah. Okay. Management and technical education as a development of human resources from the perspective of private business and state policymakers. The idea of international cooperation in this process, not only US, but also Europe. Local actors, Peruvian business leaders, religious organizations like the Compañía de Jesús or the Jesuits, undergraduate programs in management, and I will explain why undergraduates are very important in Peru, and reaction of business people to this process. Now, that is the kind of things that we are going to explore. This is the outline. We first talk why human capital and development is so important. Then we talk who are the advocates for management, education, and technical schools, the new educational institutions, and then we study two cases. One case is the Universidad del Pacífico, related with the business elite, and the second case is one of the things that all these schools teach, is operation and research. And the idea is, in this case, is how the business people, the people who is in the field doing business, react to these new people who have studied management and they came to the business and want to do different things. Okay, so first, human capital and development in the 1960s. I will read this because I think it summarizes very well the idea. Benjamin Samané writes an article in the Journal of International Labor. It's called Manpower Problems and Policies in Peru. Samané Benjamin was part of the Ministry of Labor, so of Peruvian Ministry of Labor. So he says like something, this is one of his key points. It has finally been realized that the greatest obstacle to Latin American development is, in fact, the shortage of enterprise businessmen, technicians, skilled workers, and qualified servants whose training cannot be improvised. And this is not the only person who said it. There is a lot of research in Peru about this. I just put an example. This Fernando Romero have 3 books in the topics: La industria peruana y sus obreros, Educación y Desarrollo, Trabajo, Educación y Bienestar. And there is like many studies about the idea of human capital and the relation with human development, the idea of skilled work, the lack of skilled workers, the lack of management education in Peru. So there is a consensus, and also there is a conference called CADE, that is the conference where all the business people gets together to talk about business. And many of the topics in this period between the end of 1950s and the beginning of the 1960s was exactly this point. So it was a huge discussion in Peru. That's one of the points that I'm trying to say. And why is such a big discussion? Because if you see the census, you will see this point. Peru distribution of population age 15 and older according to educational level in 1940, 1961, 1972, and 1981. So in 1940, you have 30% of the population, over 15, have primary education or elementary education complete. Only 4% secondary education and 0.9 higher education. And with higher education, we mean university. That means master or doctorate. And 61, there is an improvement to 20% in primary education, a big improvement in secondary education, and a little bit in higher education. And then you have the same idea. It's very, then 4%, 10% in 1981. So the point is, there is a problem with education and human capital in Peru, a big problem. And in the census of 61, this is a big important thing to say, almost 40% of the population aged 16 and over is illiterate. So it's a big proportion of the population. Then we have studies made by Brioni and Mejia. That's why I tell you that there are many studies about this in this moment. The study called El Obrero Industrial. This is a study just doing for workers in the manufacturing sector in Lima and Callao. So they're trying to do how many years of schooling they have. So what we find is that is the percentage there. So for example, primary education for men is for 1 to 1 year, 0 to 1 year is 7%, to 2 to 3 years, 17%, for 4 to 5 years, 47%. And this is the most, you see, most of the men are between 2 and 5 years of primary education. Then secondary education, 1 to 3 years, 20%, and 4 for 5 years, just 8%. With women, the situation is worse. Now it's 4% for 1 year, 19%, 50%, 55%. I'm very bad with the numbers in English, okay? And this is the situation. But the next slide is even more revealing of the problem. Number of years of schooling by years. So up to 20 years, all the workers, men and women. Most of the workers that have 20 years old have between 4 and 5 years of primary education, and only 4 for 5 years of secondary education, 12%. But if you look at the people who have between 30 and 49 years, you will see that only 3.4% have between 4 and 5 years of education and secondary education. So there is no such a thing as skilled workers in this moment. That is part of the conclusion of Brioni Mejia. And that's the conclusion of Samané, and that's the conclusion of Romero. So there is a huge movement between the people who is working in the Ministry of Labor and who's working in the business sector to create these technical schools for workers and the management schools, you know, for people from middle class. Okay, so who are the advocates of this management education and technical schools? State actors, Ministry of Labor, especially the section of Human Resources Service, and a new institution, the National Planning Institute. The private sector, el Instituto Peruano de Administración de Empresa, or IPAE, was founded in 1959, and it's exactly in the same period, and the main point of his new agenda is precisely management education and technical education. Then the Sociedad Nacional de Industrias, founded in 1896, la Unión Nacional de Dirigentes y Empleadores Católicos, UNDEC, founded in 1944. This is very important. The Union of National Leaders and Employers, Catholic employers, is very important. Why? Because many of the businessmen who helped to create this system belongs to this organization. And this organization is related with the Jesuits. So that's why it's so important. So in terms of international cooperation, you have USAID for Foundation, the Stanford University, the International Labor Organization, and countries like the Netherlands, Netmar, Germany, and Switzerland all put a lot of money in creating all these schools. Okay, but there is, what I want to stress is this is a question that was discussed in Peru by the state, by the private sector, and for business organizations. So what were the new educational institutions? The first one was Senati. Senati is the training school. Now, the training school for workers was created by IPAE, Sociedad Nacional de Industrias, and gets money and help at the beginning for the government of Denmark, for the International Labor Organization, for the UN, and the idea is create a school of technical training for workers. Okay, so that is the way. Then they get help for Germany and for Switzerland. Yeah, there's a lot of agreements for international cooperation with European partners. Then the next one was Universidad del Pacífico. That was created by these Catholic business persons, no, UNDEC, and with the Jesuits. And it was an undergraduate program in business management. And that was on purpose, because as you realize, not many people go to the university. Less people get a master's degree, an MBA, or a doctorate in this moment. So the undergraduate program was really important, because after you finish with your undergraduate program, you go to get a job in a company, could be in a Peruvian company, could be in a multinational company, and you will start making your career there. And then when you are more advanced in the company, probably you go for a PhD or you go for an MBA. That was more or less the scheme. However, IPAE, with the help of USAID and Stanford, creates an MBA, and the name is SAN. I will not talk too much about SAN because Carlos and Rolo have talked about, Adam have talked about this. And then in '64, the Pontificia Universidad Católica creates, with the help of the Netherlands, creates the program of Economic and Social Science and creates the Department of Economics. Okay, so all these new institutions were created at the same time, 61, 62, 63, 64. All have the same characteristics. The Jesuits, local business, they are Catholic, help from the Ministry of Labor, and different sources of international cooperation. Okay, that is more or less the idea. So I choose just one because I am familiar with this one, and I am working about the Senati, so I still don't have all the information to give you, so that's the reason I don't choose that case. Some have already been worked, So the case of Universidad del Pacífico was created by this Catholic businessman, no, related with UNDEC. And for the part of the Jesuits was Henry Wittenberg for Loyola University of Chicago. So it was an alliance between Loyola University of Chicago and the Catholic businessmen in Peru. In March of '62, they created the Board of Trustees of the Universidad del Pacífico, or Asociación del Fomento de la Investigación. And the objectives of the Universidad were research and teaching in economic and management, research and social science, and a Catholic and humanistic education. The last part is very important because they want to combine management with Catholic education. And you will see later on in the discussions about the program and the courses, how to create the curricula. So case one, the business elite. The key figures were Juan Pardo Giren, which is a very important businessman in Peru, and Rómulo Ferrero Rebagliati, which is not only an important businessman in Peru, but it was one of the most important economists at the moment, related with right group, international groups, and also was the most important Peruvian thinker in economics at that moment. Then you have Robert Mas, who donates some significant money to the university due to his affiliation to the Society of Jesus. And then this is the characteristic of the university at the beginning. Most of the professors were part-time and were executives of major Peruvian or foreign corporations in the mining and financial sectors, holding master's or doctorate degrees from the US and European universities. And their idea to teach in the Pacific is doing not only teaching, but also hire students. Previous professors hired their students to work in their companies, such as Ernst & Young. That was a classic example. Okay, so it was a training school in management, and they get jobs immediately because they were hired by their own professors. Yeah, the students were in a small group of elite Peruvian business families, around 170 in 1965, and they usually get the jobs in the most critical local companies or multinational enterprise. So that's why they don't go for an MBA, or they don't go for a doctorate program or something like that, because they get a job and they make the career inside the company, and finally they do the master degree or something like that when they want to go to a multinational company and probably work outside Peru. And then what happened with the Jesuits? That's the other point. Most of the full-time professors were Jesuits. During the first 2 years, they came from Loyola University. Then the relation with Loyola University disappeared. They pursued a more interdisciplinary education encompassing humanities, social science, and theology, which conflicted with the professional business-oriented programs for the Board of Trustees. Sorry, I can never pronounce trustees correctly. Okay, the institution have adopted a policy. Before I explain the other one, this is very important because the Jesuits at the end won. So it was not a classic business school, because the Jesuits don't want to create a classic business school. They want to create a business school, but also a school when you train the future elite of the country. So that's the reason humanities, social science, political theory, of course, theology, because they're Jesuits, were very important part of the education, no? With all the classic courses in a managed school. The other point is the Jesuits have this idea they how to recruit professors, because there is not a market of professors in Peru at that moment. So how they would create a faculty. So the idea is the institution adopted the policy of employing its alumni as a faculty members once they have completed their MBA studies in universities across Europe and the United States. That creates something interesting, because most of the people who go to the private sector and never come back to education don't get an MBA, because I mean they make their career in the company and that's it. But the people who don't want to be only in the private sector but also wants to be in the university or in the academic, they have to get the MBA to work in the university. So that is the first case. The second case I want to work, and it's based in one article by Francisco Sagasti called Management Science and the Development Country, the case of operation research in Peru, is the idea how these new things, new idea of management were accepted or not by the people who is in charge of the business, the people who have not these intentions related with the development of the country, but just want to make business. So the idea of operation research came to Peru with French experts. They introduced the idea during a visit to institutions in Lima, special universities, state universities related with engineering. Then they came the Iowa State University teams, the research agricultural applications or linear programming into the industry input-output analysis and econometric models of Peruvian economy at the University of San Marcos, Universidad Agraria, and the National Planning Institute. Yeah, the National Planning Institute is a key actor in all this process because this institution make the lines from Iowa State University to bring the professors, and that's the reason the professors at Iowa State University work with national universities, not with private. Okay, then SAN and IPAE, SAN, the MBA program, and IPAE, this business association, held events to promote operation research techniques. Okay, so there was a huge impulse to this methodology. But how the business reacts, and this is our direct quotes taken by Francisco Sagasti. So one of the most successful business basically saying, oh yes, I know all about operation research, and I also know I do not need it. My enterprise is doing fine, and if it were not, for one or for two technical problems, will be operating perfectly. And the people who said that is, for example, people who work in the fishing industry, that they are doing great, people who work in some manufacturing industry, that they were expanding their business, etc. So the people, more successful businessmen, really don't care about these techniques in that moment in Peru. So my point is there was a disconnect discourse between the ones who are studying management and want to develop the idea of management education and training in schools, and the state also, the representatives of the states, and the business people who is doing business as usual. No, the most successful, they say, I know all about, but I don't care. Middle enterprise said, I'm very interested in operation research, but I could greatly help me, but I am not sure if I guarantee you will solve my problems using OR, or I will introduce in my firm. No, so they just want a guarantee. They say, I know when I don't make the risks if I don't know it will be a result. And the last one are small business. No, your small business reacts with operation research might be a very useful thing, but you know nothing about my business. If I, who know it well, cannot do better, how could you improve my performance without knowing as much as I do? No, this is more or less the idea. So to finish the idea, what I'm trying to say here is this. That's the reason in my first title was the system, because what I try to say is there is very interesting. I will go back here to the advocates. There is these local institutions that were related with state, Minister of Labor, no, Special Women's Social Service, the National Planning Institute. So all these intellectuals and bureaucrats want really to impulse this idea of training schools and management schools in order to develop the human capital pool. And in the private sector, there are some specific interest groups like IPAE, Sociedad Nacional de Industrias, and the Catholic business persons, who wants to do it. And they make alliance with international cooperation. But the problem is all this discourse that in this special environment have a very strong consensus outside this industrial environment is not such. So there is an imbalance between the people who is creating new business, new industries in Peru, the one very successful, and this group of advocates of management education and technical schools. Okay, that's all that I have to say. I think I did it on time.
Okay, no, perfect. Thank you, Martin, for a very rich paper. I think it was very stimulating and it gave us a very big overview of development of management education in Peru from the 60s to the 80s. So now I would like to open the floor for questions. If you have a question, you can raise your hand. And I will give you,
In the chat.
or in the chat, if you have a question in the chat, you can raise your hand or type your question in the chat and we'll read it as well.
And Spanish and English.
In Spanish or in English. So we have a question from Rory Miller. Okay.
Thank you, Martin. Given the way in which social science moved to the left in Peru in the 1960s, what were relationships like between business schools and other social scientists and humanities scholars in the university?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Yes, that is the okay, yeah, that was part of the conflict that the Jesuits mediate in the Universidad del Pacífico. That was part of the conflict because many of the people who came for social science or humanities are more from the left. And in this whole process of creating the management schools and the training schools, what happened at the same time is that they create these important research institutions like IEP, DESCO, or all these research institutes in Peru that were important and very good. And that was the point that the separate, and at the end is a kind of division between social science and the management and training school. In the university, like a Pacifico or Católica, like the Universidad Católica, the Jesuits were the one who makes the bridge between business and social science and humanities that are going from the left. But in this field, they create this, at the same time that they create all these management schools, they also create IEP and DESCO and other institutions like that.
I suspect we're going to find the same in other countries as well in Latin America, and the same thing happened in Britain too. This growing split between social scientists and business schools.
Now we have a question from Edwin.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. The first one is more like a curiosity. And what was the role of Universidad de San Marcos in the early years of the Republican period, especially in connection with the engineering training in the context of mining during the colonial period, Republican period. The second one is about Jesuits and the impact of the social doctrine of the Catholic Church during these early years of the 20th century. I'm thinking about the Rerum Novarum encyclical and how this impacted the way in which they were training managers in this period.
Okay, you start with the last question. Yes, Rerum Novarum was very important. In 1953 or something like that was a big congress, a big Catholic congress related with Rerum Novarum and all the social doctrine of the church. And in all this congress, many of these business persons that creates this Union Católica of Business participate in that congress. Why? Because many of them call for Jesuit schools. For secondary and primary schools like La Inmaculada, which is a very famous Jesuit school here, and then they make business, etc. So there was a close relation with the idea of social doctrine of the church and the Jesuits and all these persons. And then when you have the liberation theology later on in the 70s or 80s, the Jesuits will be part of this process. The first one is, in short terms, is San Marcos not played a big role. What plays a big role was what they created in the end of the 19th century. There was the School of Engineers. No, the School of Engineers that was created at the two last decades of the 19th century. That was very important to create this kind of engineers that makes all the reforms in Peru in the beginning of the 20th century. That I talk a lot about them when I talk about patents, but not in this presentation. So that's
thank you, Martin. We have a question from Rob.
Well, in fact, I have two questions. It's very interesting, Martin, to listen to you. The first is, you mentioned among those external actors, you mentioned countries like the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark. And typically in the studies of this education in other countries in the 50s and 60s, these countries are not mentioned. If we go to, for instance, Ford Foundation, like that, there is an element of financial support and also an element of a content. But I wonder, what do we know about the role of these European countries you mentioned, but they're only money providers, or do they kind of have any kind of message to this? That's my first question. The second question, is more a comment related to what you're saying about operational research. And I know that Peru and Norway is totally different, but when it comes to the introduction of operational research, there are some similarities. But what we see from Norway is that the reaction in business was similar, but still they had some impact, but on other labels than operational research. For instance, some of the large companies, state-owned companies, they started to establish office block planning to plan for the future in aluminium industry, 5 years plan, 10 years plan, by using operational methods. Do you find similar things in your case?
Yeah. Again, I will start with the last question. Yeah, because yes, I have one case when they start using this. At the beginning, they don't believe in the method, as I said, at the end of the 60s. And then at the end of the 1970s, they start using these methods in some of the big corporations. But it's, and the people who start using were people who is coming back from the US. People who have worked in the US, and they are coming back to work in Peru at the end of the 1970s. They were very successful in the US, and some companies hire them for sometimes for family relations, or sometimes because they want to make a big transformation in the company, and they started doing this OER things and created departments in some of the biggest. But this was a slow process. That's the point. And then for the first question, the message. Yeah, that's very interesting because in the beginning, for example, when I followed Denmark and the technical school, they just give money more than anything else. But Switzerland, yes, they help with organization. The Netherlands were more Catholic associations from the Netherlands. Some of them related with the people in government that make lobby for the government to give money, and they make money. They give money more to economics and management. Okay, but they don't have a strong opinion in how the things have to be done. Okay, when they look more deeply in that, when they took Senati, for example, when you have the Switzerlands and the Germans, then you have something more different on how you organize, how you have to organize the courses, how to organize the relation between the technical training schools with private companies and something like that. That is what I can answer for now.
Okay, thank you, Martin. We have 5 minutes and we have 2 questions. I think we have 2 questions, or three. Okay, 3 questions. So the first one is from Sergio Wanderlei in Brazil. Sergio, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Martin. I put the question on the chat, but I'll go ahead. I see many similarities with the Brazilian case, and I see the dating of the new business school starting in the early 60s. And I see that was geared by many US organizations, Ford Foundation, USAID, of course, International Labor Organization that was pushed by them. So my question was whether the Alliance for Progress, which on what I read had also strong presence in Peru, was maybe the big cornerstone for all this movement.
Oh, yes, and it works with the sun. I didn't work the case of the sun because I have really worked in the article by Alan and Carlos. Yeah, but yeah, the Alliance for Progress works a little bit with IPAE, and then they help to create a sun. So it was important.
Yeah,
okay,
for the dating, what I saw is that the Ford Foundation only jumped in Latin America after the Alliance for Progress, because before they were only operating in Asia, and it was only, of course, after the Cuban Revolution that they added Latin America to Ford Foundation overseas projects. So,
and Ford Foundation helps to make the divide between business schools and social science that Rory asked me before, because Ford Foundation at the end decided to financial el Instituto of Estudios Peruanos, it was more social and political science, and then they put the money in the Católica University and the Faculty of Social Science.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Martina and Sergio. We have 2 questions and 3 minutes, so it's going to be tight. Gabriela, do you want to read your question or yourself, or I can read it?
Yeah, because I can read in the chat.
Okay, no, I'll read the question. So, Gabriela asks, ¿qué impacto tuvo la entrada de los jesuitas a la teología de la liberación entre los empresarios y la universidad?
Ya, es mixta porque los jesuitas tienen la parte más, tienen una parte conservadora y una parte de teología de la liberación. Ya, entonces, entonces para ver esa respuesta hay que ver, se responde a través de un personaje que es MacGregor. ¿Ya? Que es MacGregor es el jesuita, que era el general de la compañía, bueno, el provincial de la compañía en ese momento, y que estaba en las 2 universidades, en la Universidad del Pacífico y en la Universidad Católica. Y entonces él negoció las relaciones estables entre los jesuitas que apoyaban teología de la liberación y de aquellos que no la apoyaban. Y la relación entre los empresarios católicos que eran pro-jesuitas, pero que no estarían a favor de teología de la liberación. Entonces él en un momento es el que apoya a impulsar la Pacífico. Cuando ve que la Pacífico ya estaba marchando, se va a la Católica. Y él es el que decide hablar con la Ford Foundation para sacar la Facultad de Ciencias Sociales y Economía. Entonces, eso es.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabriela, for the very interesting question, and Martin for your answer. We have a final question from Julio Cesar Zuluaga. Julio Cesar, do you want to go ahead and read your question, or do you want me to read your question? Okay, well, I'll read it. If you can see, if you can move it upwards. So Julio Cesar says, thanks, Martin, for the presentation. In Colombia, management education received a big push from businessmen and entrepreneurs. For example, they founded the first MBA in Colombia, even though they brought Peter Drucker to one of the leading public universities and organized conferences dedicated to executive management. I wonder if this was the case of Peru by the second half of the 20th century, and you can say something about it?
So about business people, yeah, I mean, the people who created Universidad del Pacífico were all business. I mean, they were more, you can say they were more, the difference between the ones that I explained they were related directly with, Prado Hearing was a very important businessman in Peru. Sunday Beltran was also very important businessman in Peru. They all belong to the old-fashioned, if you want to say, business class, and they want to modernize their style. So that are the ones who get the big effort or the money to create all these business organizations. That is and the new ones that they are making business about the fishing industry, they are making business about some technological things, new technological things are the ones precisely. That's the contradiction in this process. They are not so interested in the management schools and all the stuff. Okay, but there is an important business groups that impulse all this stuff. La Sociedad Nacional de Industrias is behind everything.
Bueno, okay, thank you, Martin, for clarifying this and for answering the questions in such a timely way. And thank you for your fantastic first paper, which I think is going to start the conversation about management education in Latin America. And we're going to follow with Andrea Luke now, who's going to present the paper titled the Americanization narrative, the origins and evolution of management, education, and training in Argentina from the 1930s to the 1960s. And Andrea doesn't need introduction in this group, but I think it's my duty to do it. So Andrea is a researcher at the National Council of Scientific and Technical Research of Argentina, CONICET, and is associate professor at the School of Management here in Universidad de los Andes. She's a member of the History, Business, and Empresarial group here in Los Andes as well. She received her PhD from the Universidad Nacional del Centro de Buenos Aires and was formerly a Harvard Newcomb Fellow in Business History and subsequently a Research Fellow at Harvard Business School. So Andrea, as we all know, has published widely on the business history of Latin America, in particular on the history of direct foreign investment, family business, and corporate networks during the 20th century. Some of her recent publications are, for example, Women May Be Climbing on Board, but Not in First Class, a long-term study of the factors affecting women's board participation in Argentina and Chile in the 20th century, published in Business History Review. And she has published more extensively, but if I start reading all your papers, I won't finish my introduction. So, Andrea, thank you for being here. And
thank you, muchas gracias. I will present very quickly this paper, which is a very long, detailed sort of working in progress paper. Let me say also that this paper is part of a broader research that I have the pleasure to share with Rolf Amdam. We already have 2 articles. One is In the Shadow of Americanization, the origins and evolution of management, education, and training in Argentina, which is already have been accepted in business history. And in this paper, we focus on the 2 most Americanized experiments in Argentina. And also, as part of the discussion, we introduced a new paper about the role of ILO and management development in Argentina at the same period of time. And previous research with Norma Lanciotti is more about staffing policies and who are the managers of largest companies, particularly Americans and British firms. So this is a paper, this is more like a leftover paper, Las Obras, in Spanish, because during the research, we found a lot of different organizations. So the idea is continue to discuss the development of Argentinian system of making managers. I think we are using that theoretical approach, making managers, from the late 40s to the late 60s. And as you can see, this is very broad perspective because we try to trace universities and non-university levels, private and public and private institutions, profit and non-profit organizations, and executive education on non-degree and degree programs. So we try to map in who is taking care. And I want to say that we are focusing management education, not technical, because Martin put the 2 topics, and at least in Argentina, technical education starts earlier, the state has a more critical role, and we decide to put aside the same with vocational education. So we can discuss this is more management education, middle and top. We found different local actors, various international actors. This is similar to what Martin has said about Peru. And we use different sources in order to create this map. Also, the paper, as I said, has shared 2 main theoretical approach, this making manager perspective that is broadening the focus from formal business education program. This has been traditional study, MBAs and universities, to include different programs and events to develop managers. So broad the scope of our research. And second, I think most of us, and Sergio and a lot of people share this idea to moving out of the most traditional United States and Western European perspective to the global South. So this is the perspective. But Argentina is a fascinating case. As you know, we are a very special country, to say the least. But believe it or not, it was the most industrialized country in the region until the 40s. Also, it's a country where United States management ideas and model has modest impact until the mid-50s. There's a lot of European traditions, more traditional from France, Germany, and Italy as well. And also, particularly in the 60s, a lot of volatility in economic and political environment. As Rory have also mentioned, a lot of ideological struggles between the right and the left and other people. So let's start first for these non-university levels. I try to separate into this paper, non and university levels, and particularly executive education and management training. Again, middle and top. We are not talking about vocational training or other stuff. As Martin said, and this is, I think, in most Latin American countries, there's a huge debate about how the lack of managerial and technical resources was seen as a significant obstacle to industrialization. Of course, each country has different diagnoses, different numbers, but I think everybody shared the same sort of debate at the mid-century. But our main proposition for this early period, 40s and 50s, as business people and private associations were the driving forces behind the first steps in creating management training sector in Argentina. And our milestone, so there's some scientific research center in the 30s, but the main association with the Círculo Argentino de Estudios sobre Organización Industrial, CADESOL, which is the managers of the largest and foreign companies that they create this association as a very private in order to train themselves, the modern techniques in accounting and management techniques. So it's an absolutely private institution. The state was not there at the beginning. And secondly, and this is what we're trying to do, who is when it started, the name, the initial in English, and try to see who are behind. Of course, in 1952, very similar to what Martin has said, the Christian Association of Business Managers also started to organize courses. So we try to identify, but also you see very functional areas of marketing, like sales, logistics, and also all of these start in the 50s. So there's no universities, are private organizations pushed by business people, and not only rich people, and managers, which I think is interesting in the case of Argentina. I'm going very quickly because we don't have much time. The 60s is the golden age because there are so many different changes at institutional levels, including formal education. In other papers with Rolf, we discussed particularly the role of IDEA, which is the Instituto para el Desarrollo de Ejecutivos in Argentina. And again, check it the name, ejecutivos, executives. They're not entrepreneurs or business people, executives. And they still exist, the IDEA. This is the most Americanized. They receive a lot of support for the Ford Foundation at Harvard Business School. And also the Productivity Center of Argentina, the Centro de Productividad de Argentina. And this is the state, the Frondizi administration, who put a lot of money, millions of dollars, together with the technical assistant organization, the ILO or OIT, or International Labor Organization, again, to push management, top management development in Argentina. Again, I'm not discussing now these two initiatives because we have discussed in different papers. But what is showing is a growing demand for management and technical training, and why we try to relate what's going on in the business sector in Argentina. In the 60s, there are a lot of foreign takeovers of Argentinian companies, which is impacting in the recruitment pattern for managers and executives. Also the effect of crisis and recession. And of course, the idea of management appeared to be a new subject. And actually, I will have, and again, we try to map, and there's a lot of associations, marketing, the first Argentinian marketing association is 1965. And look at this, all of these different institutions in the 60s. The first one is Centro de Productividad Argentina, which is the most important because they're promoting a lot of courses and training, but they're not granting any degree. They're just courses, which I think is interesting. So what happened in the 60s, and I think it's a complementary interpretation of why all these institutions were creating. And even we try to find the first consulting firms dedicated to selecting managers, such as you can see the advertising, Top Management International, Executive, and IC Selection. This is an advertising, Consultores en Selección de Personal Técnico, and Executive, Ejecutivo. And also magazine dedicated exclusively to businessmen, such as Competencia, which is published by Primera Planas in 1967, which is absolutely fascinating sources to understand what is going on. And in the long paper, even we talk about how in the music and in art, executives appear as a new social class and not businessmen. And this is a point that maybe is different from other research. So the main proposition is the number of business management education programs, not degree, was difficult to measure, but it's a lot from different parts. Of course, in the 60s, as Sergio has said, you start to see the Ford Foundation become more visible, but coexist with other institutions, such as the International Labour Organization. And we proposed at the end of the 60s, a labor market for executive was emerging. And as you can see, requisitos, do you speak English? And look at, I think we are not seeing, ¿cómo se recluta la nueva raza? You know, it's a nueva raza, and they're talking about executives. So I think it's fascinating. So this is a private association non-degree program, and then move quickly to the role of academia, what happened at the university level. So Argentina has a very long tradition about university education. Peronism made a huge advancement in the number of people who attend to universities, but most of them are lawyers, engineers, and accountants, not business people. What happened in the public universities? The largest one, particularly the Universidad of Buenos Aires, launched in 1958, the first undergraduate Bachelor of Administration. And again, here you have America. This agreement with the Columbia University and support by the United States Agency for International Development, but also the Argentinian government, because we sometimes see only the United States, but Argentinian government is spending a lot of money in order to promote this bachelor degree. But the Universidad Nacional de La Plata and other national universities also is trying to improve management, undergraduate management degrees in business. I would say that Universidad de La Plata went for more public administration than private administration. There's other differences. So, but what happened, the numbers of people enrolled are very low as you compare accountings and business administration. This is Universidad of Buenos Aires, which is the largest and the most important university in Argentina. And in terms of degree, until 1964, it's only 9. So it still is a very small number. It took a lot of time to really create a new, business administrators in Universidad of Buenos Aires. But for me, and similar what Martin has said, is the role of private universities. Argentina, you cannot have private universities only until the 58. And then happened 2 important institutions. One is the UADE, probably you know, because today is one of the largest private universities educating business people. And this is supported by the Argentinian Chamber of Commerce. So this is similar to what happened in France. But also we have the Catholic University, not Jesuit, but Catholic University, which is absolutely important. And we need to do more research about that. This is similar to Spain or Peru, that universities linked to religious orders. But this is more promoted not for the Jesuits, more the Catholic Church. And it's very important. And you can see, I don't have time, but also in Mendoza and Santa Fe, in Cordoba. So small Catholic universities that are providing undergraduate degree in business administration in Mar del Plata. So it's not Buenos Aires City, in many other cities of Argentina. As you can see, more names, all in the 60s. Of course, in terms of the Catholic University in Buenos Aires, this is only Buenos Aires City, is important, as even larger than science and engineering. So that school, that university in particular, was very much dedicated to business and economic administration. No support for any foreign organization, no United States. There's in-house sort of development. Again, as I said, another project that we study is the idea. I don't have time, and we dedicated half paper with Rolf to study this. But why this is important? Because Argentina lacks standard-setting institution in the field of management and education that is an MBA. Peru has the MBA, Colombia, and Argentina has many of these institutions, but not MBA traditionally defined. Full-time professor, full-time students, and research, not short-term degrees. And for that, the Ford Foundation and Harvard Business School really tried to push this project. This project failed because they only were able to launch the intensive course for improvement of executive, called CIPE, for 12 weeks. So this is a huge debate between the IDEA and Ford Foundation and Harvard Business School about the model. But I found fascinating this case. But it's sort of a failure because even IDEA discontinued this project and they changed the name. It's not ejecutivos in the name, it's empresarios. And why? And this is political and ideological debate. In 1974, Argentina was in a huge ideological struggle. Our coup d'etat was in 1976, so this radicalization. So entrepreneurs said, if business education is not so important, we need to move our projects, because IDEA was the largest companies in Argentina, foreign and private, were around and pushing IDEA. So to conclude, because I have 2 minutes or 3 minutes left.
You have 3 minutes, don't worry.
So in terms of what we try to find, first, a longer time dimension in the development of management education. If you include non-universities and degree programs, you can find longer even in the late 30s and early 40s. Again, the debate on management, and I would say top management education, was not initiated nor even lead by formal education system, rather by managers of largest companies. And I said not only owners and managers of largest companies, especially the multinationals from the early 40s. And why? Because in-house training continued to dominate in Argentina. And it was not until the late years of the 60s that executive level market emerged, as I mentioned before. And also, I think in the case of Argentina, it's absolutely impressive. A lot of people or actors that have been involved beyond the traditional actors, as has been studied in previously. By the end of the 60s, I think the newly development field of business administration was included also in most state and private universities. But in parallel, a booming number of executive education institutions, and in terms of academic quality, very uneven, and serving different needs. And something that all sources mentioned in the case of Argentina, because now we're in our more recent research, we are focused on that, but absolutely uncoordinated efforts. Everybody's trying to do different things, even though Argentina created in the mid-60s, the National Committee of Scientific Organization, the CADOC, which tried to represent all organizations working in the field of management education. And I'm sure if other Latin American countries has this sort of, national committee for scientific organization. The only thing that Argentina seemed to be lagging behind is because Argentina, even though there's a booming offer and different institutions, they lack a traditional MBA school, as defined by CLADEA by this time. And why, in the paper, we try to relate it with strong influence of local processes, including foreign takeovers of Argentina, but mostly economic, political instability and inflation that many projects fail and has to, readjust their specificities. I think I have only one extra slide in terms of, and I like this picture because colonialismo no. This is the opposition of all the students at the University of Buenos Aires against the agreement with Ford Foundation and other, and in the public universities, as Rory has said, there's a huge opposition in order to please don't make any sort of agreement with United States or other foreign organizations. So that means that the private sector was the only one who continued receiving a lot of money in the late 60s and early 70s. So my last comment, I think in terms of the contribution of the paper, it confirms that the wide variety of organization and actors have been involved in creating institutions and systems for the development and education of managers. The university in Argentina has played a less important role as promoter of business education. There are some initiatives, but there's not the most important one. United States actors participate in this process with some impact, but the result was not a copy of any United States model, nor were they the dominant force. And I think this is the Rolf Amdam keynote speaker that we will listen today. I think contributes to this discussion about the usefulness or not of the concept of Americanization of management education. Thank you very much, and I stop sharing.
Thank you, Andrea, for a fascinating paper, and we can already see very strong differences with the Peruvian case that Martin has just presented to us. So we have a question, 15 minutes for questions, and we have already one. As I said before, you can raise your hand in the chat, or you can type your question and we'll read it for you. But we'll start here in this room with
Orlando,
go ahead.
sociólogo, luego del medio de investigación de empresas, pero bueno. Interesante la periodicidad que dio, lo va a hacer en español, puede responder en inglés. Hablar de los años dorados, la influencia fuera de la no universitaria y universitaria. Bueno, los años 60 puede ser interpreto como el periodo que tomó a los americanos para instalarse y establecer su propia influencia. Es la posguerra. Pero antes de eso, está todo lo que fue la influencia, por ejemplo, de los empresarios de la inmigración. europea, sobre todo Alemania, conocemos de Alemania en Argentina. Estudiando algo sobre la industria cervecera, descubrí que en Argentina fueron los alemanes los que están al origen de la más importante industria cervecera aún hoy. En ese sentido, ¿esa influencia es solo anecdótica hoy o se recuperó esa influencia del empresariado, de los empresarios inmigrantes europeos, entre otros alemanes, creo que son los más importantes? ¿Eso es solo anecdótico en el momento en que se constituye en los años 60, los años dorados? ¿Es solamente la influencia americana o se recupera un poco esa tradición empresarial no universitaria?
¿Respondo? Marinés Barbero is there. Marinés, I don't know if you are there. She is the expert of immigration and entrepreneurship in Argentina. Marinés is the one who knows everything about it. So, I mean, maybe she can answer better than me. No, of course, it's critical for Argentina. You know, in Argentina, 80% of business people at the early 20th century came from abroad. Italy is the largest, Spain and Germany. So it's critical. But I must say that in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and 60s, that I am trying to find this, I cannot connect, you know, like immigration and business education. There is something there, the Dante Alighieri University. So there are some, but it's not the dominant force. So my answer is, as I said, in-house training. So there's a lot of, you know, the Royal Social Networks and people, if you belong to some immigrant community, probably you have been working in that company for many, many years, and then training. But they are not moving to create like separate institutions, Italians, Germans, etc., etc. That would be my answer. But as you can see, I mentioned a guy who called Jacobo Weiner. And that guy, I think we should spend more time doing research about it, because he has a lot of influence in Europe, in Germany, and he was the one who pushed, you know, also scientific management reforms that started in the 20s and the 30s, and is much connected with, you know, European tradition rather than traditional American sort of style of management. But of course, your question is critical for Argentina. Immigration and entrepreneurship and immigration is a key answer, but I can, maybe I should rethink again, but I cannot find a huge, in terms of creating institutions, you know, for training people. All these associations are not, except Dante Alighieri, in the case of Italians, I cannot find a direct connection between immigrants and business, formal and informal degree.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Orlando. I would like to remind you, we still have 12 minutes for questions. So if anyone wants to go ahead, George.
No, right. Andrea, thank you. I was wondering, so you showed that at the beginning, the number of students was very low. But and how do you, so was it low because of, you know, it's a new field and was not maybe advertised enough yet? Or because if there wasn't an external role, there was probably, I understand, an interest from the industry, but from the students, it seemed didn't raise their attention.
That's a great question. The low number of students is for undergraduates in Universidad of Buenos Aires, the public university. And this is much connect, and there's some very nice sources of people, because, you know, academia is a political arena as well, you know, and careers have their own identity. And in terms of Universidad of Buenos Aires, and still, is there accountants, contadores públicos are very powerful. And there's a huge struggle, not between sociology and economics, it's between accountability and business administration, you know, and they fight in terms of legitimization. And a lot of people thought that business management has not all, you know, the legitimacy to create sort of academic field in Buenos Aires University. You know what I meant? It's in Buenos Aires University, but also Universidad de La Plata, and the public universities, management struggle as a discipline to create legitimacy and that people said this is a very good career for me, because accountants are more powerful in terms, and there's a lot of struggle in terms of how they discuss the curricula and a lot of stuff. So I think in public universities is more like creating a legitimacy for these new fields. In terms of short-term or executive education, is different, and you find there's thousands of people taking this course. But again, Argentina has not an MBA. So the only thing that you can take as a manager is short-term courses. And with ILO or IDEA, you have thousands. So it's a booming offer, and a lot of people are attending for more manager or medium management, but non-pre-education. So I think that would be a good point to discuss differently what that means to be trained as making manager as short-term courses, and how difficult it was for business administration to create legitimacy in us. And it still is not the dominant number, still in Buenos Aires University. Economists and accountants and business administration, all the three careers are in the same school, and it is not the most dominant force. And I think Carlos Davila will discuss what that means to create business administration as academic field. It means doing research, publishing, PhDs, not only training for people who know about techniques. And I think that is a very interesting discussion that maybe we need to discuss further to separate both stuff. That makes sense?
Yeah, I have a follow-up question, but I let someone else.
Maybe we can follow those questions in the coffee break.
Yeah.
So, Rod,
Just want to make a comment and add something on this question about the archival sources of this, because historians we don't only like, but we use archival sources, and which illustrates this phenomena that the development of this field it's a lot of informal institutions that is difficult to quantify and to categorize. And this example is that I spent some years ago in the archives, the National Archives, United States, to research on the US aid archives, and we used some of the data in the article Carlos and I wrote on the executive education in Latin America a couple of years ago. If we go then to this archive of the US aid, which was strongly involved in Latin America, and if you go to the archives and search for higher education, universities, and this kind of traditional categories, you find nothing about management education. You find nothing about executive education. No statistics. We find statistics on chemistry, sociology, and all these disciplines. But they are hidden in small projects within business project, industrial services, consultancies. There you find they gave support to something that became a business school. Then they find that they gave support to something that became executive education. So if you want to quantify this, you need a lot of time in the archives to start from the very, very bottom.
Would you like to react to that, Andrea?
No, totally agree. And that's why I think the traditional categories that have been used for other countries maybe are not so suited for our research. As I said, I think it's a completely different story when you look training, short-term training for manager, top manager, and different when you look legitimacy of business administration as academic fields in our country. At least in Argentina, these are contrasted in the 60s. And I would say, actually, our first, Marinés probably knows better than me, but Argentina only has an MBA and business school later on. In the 70s, and most of them are in the 80s and 90s. So as an academic field, in terms of, and this is something that the Americans complains a lot. And actually, when they criticize IDEA, the Ford Foundation, is because of that. They were not able to promote research. They are not able to really hire full-time people. And why? Because most of the people, even that went abroad using Ford Foundation scholarship or ILO scholarship, when we back to Argentina, due to instability, they prefer to work in the private or as a consultants rather than to become full-time professors. So I think your question is very good, and we should try to maybe distinguish these two different approach to business education.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. That was really interesting. We have a question on Zoom from Marinés Barbero. Marinés, if you can unmute yourself and.
Hola, buenos días a todos. Andy, felicitaciones por una presentación óptima, como siempre agregaría, a partir de tu presentación, tenía una serie de inquietudes, o sea, ni siquiera sé si son preguntas, pero de alguna manera también líneas posibles de investigación. Uno, ¿qué pasa con las otras gremiales empresarias más allá de la Cámara Argentina de Comercio, que tiene desde los años 50 cursos de capacitación cada vez más intensos? ¿Qué pasa con la Unión Industrial? ¿Qué pasa con las asociaciones bancarias? ¿Hay alguna voluntad por parte de esas gremiales empresarias de fomentar la educación ejecutiva? Después, sí, a partir de 1966, con el golpe militar, donde de alguna manera, digamos, se consolida lo que se llama el eficientismo, ¿hay algún tipo de iniciativa gubernamental, más allá de las universidades, iniciativas que surjan, por ejemplo, de ministerios o del Ministerio de Educación o del Ministerio de Economía, donde se apunte a la formación en management? Y tercero, ¿en qué medida los centros de investigación que existían ya en los 60 pudieron contribuir al conocimiento sobre la problemática del management y a promover una mayor difusión de la educación ejecutiva?
Gracias, Marinés. No tengo tiempo de responder todo esto y creo que después se las traduzco a Rolf. Creo que son temas para profundizar. No he encontrado ni a la Unión Industrial ni a la Asociación Bancaria promoviendo instituciones, pero sí participando de otras iniciativas, ¿sí? O sea, como estudiando en IDEA, por ejemplo, vos las podés encontrar, pero hasta ahora no he encontrado, ni por nombrar dos que tú señales. El golpe, everybody knows that in 1966, Onganía, otro golpe militar, y para mí es curioso porque el gobierno de Onganía, y eso el paper que escribimos con Rolf sobre la OIT, en Argentina discontinúa lo que era el mayor centro promovido por el Estado, que es este Centro de la Productividad de la Argentina, y lo discontinúa bajo el argumento de que ya existían otras instituciones, básicamente privadas. Es como que mi interpretación, Marinés, es que el Estado incluso se retira después del 66 con la cuestión eficientista, y básicamente el instituto que ellos nombran es el Instituto de Tecnología Industrial, el INTI, que no hay una historia del INTI en Argentina y que deberíamos profundizar. Y los centros de investigación, te lo debo, hay que seguir trabajando, los que ya existían. Creo que ahí la Fundación Ditela, sabemos que Salduendo y todos están haciendo investigaciones de los años 60 sobre el empresariado industrial, pero hay que seguir profundizando. Y eso es anoté todo, como siempre, tus sugerencias para seguir mejorando el paper. Gracias, Marinés.
Okay, if there's no further question, we have 2 minutes, Andrea, if you would like to wrap up with a conclusion or something, add something else, no?
I think it's no, I mean, Argentina is a fascinating country because you can see a lot of booming stories, but necessarily, and I like to highlight the failure. I mean, in the paper, we also try to arise that we tends to be a historian, ex post facto, institutions like exist, are very successful, and everybody knows about it. What happened with this institution that at some point tried to create, this, like the Centro Productividad Argentina, or even IDEA Business School? Nobody knows about it. And they were very important. They received a lot of money. And again, private money, but also state money in Argentina, and they disappeared. So the paper also tried to discuss what happened with the failure, not only with successful stories. I would say that.
Bueno, thank you, Andrea. And also thank you, Martin, for a fascinating paper earlier. I think it was a great discussion and very different papers as well in terms of the structures of how management developed in Peru and in Argentina. We saw that very clearly, the influence of universities, the Universidad del Pacífico in Peru, the Jesuits, whereas in Argentina, we have more informal networks and we have businessmen and private initiatives, but also the difference between technical and more management education and the way in which these business schools articulated with broader networks outside.
And
right?
I would say public and private universities. because most of these universities that Martin have said that even you have studied in Colombia are private universities. You know, the story about the Universidad de Buenos Aires, Universidad de La Plata, and the difficult to really legitimize this field of business administration because of political struggle, ideological struggles, also I think it's important.
See, and also what you mentioned was really fascinating, these magazines that try to sort of yes, create this new profession and sort of legitimate it.
Yeah, and they call the nueva raza, you know, the race. This is in the 60s, yes.
Exactly.